The first knock on my door sounded like nothing, just wood and wind at 4:32 a.m. The second dragged me out of bed. By the third, it wasn't a sound anymore, it was a warning. When I opened the door, my 11-year-old nephew stood there in soaked pajamas, lips blue, carrying his little sister on his back like a body. Her nightgown was frozen stiff. His feet bled through his sneakers. Behind them, the winter air felt like broken glass on my skin. Their parents were not in a car crash. They were not missing. They were at a casino drinking champagne. What they didn't know was that this night would be the last time they ever had the power to hurt those kids. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Because what happened next didn't just break something inside me, it lit a fire I didn't know I had. And this story is only getting darker from here. My name is Willow Hart, 34 years old. And for as long as I can remember, my family treated me like I was the extra puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere. Growing up in that house felt like walking through a museum dedicated to my younger brother Joshua, every shelf, every word, every smile, curated just for him. I didn't understand it back then. I only knew the air felt different when he walked into the room, warm and expectant, while it always turned cold the second I appeared behind him. One of my earliest memories is a dinner table moment, the kind that shouldn't stick but somehow branded itself into me like a quiet scar. I must have been 7. The kitchen smelled like garlic bread and my mom's cheap Chardonnay, the overhead lights buzzing the way they always did in that old house. I reached for the bowl of spaghetti, stomach growling after school, and before my fingers touched the ladle, Mom's hand slapped mine away lightly. Not harsh, just dismissive. "Wait, sweetheart, let Joshua go first," she said, smiling at him like he was a prince returning from war, and not a 5-year-old who'd spent the day coloring dinosaurs. He piled his plate high, noodles sliding off the edges. I waited. My stomach growled again. No one noticed. I swallowed the sting, not knowing then just how familiar that feeling would become. I didn't know it back then, but this small moment would echo through years of bigger wounds. Flash forward to middle school. The gym smelled like sweat and rubber, and I'd just won first place in an essay competition, the first thing I'd ever felt genuinely proud of. They called my name over the crackling loudspeaker, and I remember gripping the certificate so tightly the corners bent. I scanned the bleachers for my parents, wanting just one smile, one nod, something. Instead, I saw Dad leaning down to tie Joshua's shoelaces, while Mom snapped a picture of him holding his participation ribbon from kickball. "Look at you, honey," she beamed at him. Neither of them noticed the paper in my shaking hands. I didn't know it then, but that kind of invisibility teaches you to shrink yourself before the world even asks you to. The favoritism wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that, almost polite, the kind of thing outsiders might miss. But I felt it everywhere. In the Christmas mornings, where Joshua unwrapped new gadgets, while I got off-brand makeup kits. In the birthdays where he got a bakery cake with his name piped in blue frosting, while mine was homemade from a boxed mix. In the way Dad clapped him on the back and called him champ, while I got reminders to be reasonable whenever I expressed the slightest want. One summer afternoon when I was 14, the heat was so thick the air felt chewable. Cicadas screamed from every tree, and sweat rolled down my back as I washed dishes in the dim kitchen. I'd spent the whole day helping Mom, while Joshua played video games in the air-conditioned living room. When Dad came home, he walked straight to Joshua, ruffled his hair, and said, "There's my man." Then he glanced at me, still standing at the sink, hands pruny and aching. "Don't guilt-trip your brother," he muttered. I hadn't said a single word. I swallowed that hurt too, not realizing it was teaching me that my voice didn't matter. Years later, when I started high school, I got my first job at the diner off Main Street. The place smelled like burnt coffee and frying oil, the neon sign flickering in a way that made everything feel slightly crooked. I worked late nights wiping ketchup from red vinyl booths, earning minimum wage. Every paycheck went straight into an envelope labeled family. Mom always said we needed it, so I handed it over without thinking. I didn't know until much later that Joshua used my money to buy concert tickets and limited edition sneakers. I didn't know it back then, but resentment grows slow, like mold, quiet, hidden, spreading anyway. Thanksgiving during my senior year is a memory I can still taste: dry turkey, canned cranberry sauce, and the bitter tang of disappointment. Snow had begun drifting against the windows, soft and dreamy. I'd just gotten my acceptance letter to nursing school, a moment that should have felt like triumph. My hands trembled when I held the envelope. But before I could even share the news, Dad clapped loudly and announced Joshua got a new scholarship for his business program, Big Future, ahead of this one. He wrapped an arm around Joshua, who smirked at me over the rim of his sparkling cider glass. I waited for my turn. It never came. I ate my dinner quietly while the room buzzed around him. I swallowed it, but it carved deeper than I realized. Looking back, I can see how every small cut shaped me, the rooms where I learned to make myself smaller, the hallways where my footsteps felt too loud, the nights I prayed someone would ask about my day instead of Joshua's. I grew up thinking love was conditional and attention was something you earned through perfection. Maybe that's why I ran toward nursing, a place where helping people made me feel visible, even if only for a moment. My childhood wasn't a storm. It was the pressure before one. The quiet tension of knowing something inside the foundation was already cracked. I just didn't know yet how deep the damage ran or how much it would matter when my brother became a father. I didn't know it back then, but every single wound from those years would come back for me and for his children in ways none of us were ready for. By the time I left for nursing school at 18, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a showroom I was just passing through. Joshua was still the golden boy, the future of the family, while I was the kid who liked to help people. It was some phase I'd grow out of. The night before I moved into the dorms, Mom made lasagna for a special family dinner. The table was set, candles burning low. For a second, I let myself believe it might finally be about me. Dad cleared his throat, raised his glass. To Joshua, he said, "We're so proud of you for taking that business internship. That's real initiative. That's leadership." Everyone clinked glasses. I sat there with my water, staring at the small stack of nursing school paperwork I'd placed at the edge of the table. No one looked. Mom eventually turned to me and said, "You'll be fine, honey. Nurses are always needed." Then she asked Joshua if he'd thought more about law school. I smiled. I swallowed. I washed the dishes while Joshua went out to celebrate. That's how I left home, with pruny fingers and a polite goodbye. I didn't know it then, but walking out that door was the first time I quietly chose myself. College was loud and smelled like microwave ramen and cheap body spray. I worked shifts at a campus coffee shop, pulled all-nighters over anatomy textbooks, and learned how to keep a human being alive in a crisis. My effort finally turned into something measurable: grades, praise from professors, patients whispering thank you. It felt like oxygen. Every winter, I went home for the holidays, and every time the old hierarchy snapped back into place the second I walked through the door. One Christmas, the house smelled like pine candles and red wine. The tree was loaded with matching ornaments. Mom hated anything that ruined the aesthetic. I handed her a small gift bag, a wool scarf I'd saved up for. She hugged me, said, "You shouldn't spend your money on me," and set it aside. 10 minutes later, Joshua rolled in a new flat-screen TV. "Surprise, Mom," for the living room. He grinned. She burst into tears. Dad clapped him on the back. "That's my boy." My scarf never left the bag. I joked about being the boring one. Inside, something tightened like a door, quietly locking. I didn't know it then, but those holidays were warning shots, not just for me, but for the kids Joshua would eventually have. Joshua met Jane when I was in my last year of nursing school. She was pretty in that sharp, curated way social media loves. The first time I met her at a family cookout grill, smoke curled through the humid air. "So you're the nurse," she said, looking me up and down. "Yeah," I nodded. "Pediatrics, hopefully." She smiled. "Cute, built-in babysitter for when we have kids, right?" Josh, he laughed. "Told you. She's useful. Useful. Not loved, not valued, just convenient." Later, alone in the kitchen, Jane leaned against the counter. "I'm more of a stay-at-home and build-a-brand kind of girl," she said. "Joshua works hard enough for both of us. That's what men are for, right?" Her tone made my skin itch. I watched her that afternoon, how she handed Joshua plates instead of picking any up. How she took the biggest slice of cake. How she brushed off Mom's stories before checking her phone again. I didn't know it back then, but she wasn't just another person who adored my brother. She was gasoline on an already burning fire. When Dean was born, I tried to be the good aunt. I brought diapers and casseroles. The house smelled like sour milk and vanilla candles. Jane handed me the baby like he was a prop, then disappeared upstairs. Joshua bragged about how exhausted he was, how hard it was balancing being a dad with building his brand. "You wouldn't get it," he said one afternoon. "You're good with kids, but you don't know pressure the way I do." I looked at the stack of unpaid nursing school bills in my bag and said nothing. When Hannah came along 4 years later, the house was bigger, the cars nicer, the wine more expensive. But the kids' clothes were a little too small, their hair a little too unwashed, their eyes a little too careful. I noticed because I'd seen that look before in the mirror growing up under someone else's spotlight. I'm just not a kid person. Jane would shrug, scrolling her phone while the kids played in a corner. Thank God for tablets. So I started doing what I could around the edges. dropping off a bag of groceries by accident, slipping Dean a 20 for snacks, refilling Hannah's inhaler when Jane forgot to call the pharmacy. Tiny acts small enough they could be brushed off as kindness, not confrontation. I didn't know it then, but every one of those choices was nudging me closer to a line I didn't know I was going to cross. I didn't know it then, but all those quiet years, those dinners, those holidays, those little red flags were leading straight to one freezing night. One locked smart door and 2 shivering kids on my doorstep, forcing me to decide what kind of family I was willing to be. By the time Dean was 7 and Hannah was barely walking, the cracks in Joshua and Jane's perfect life were no longer cracks. They were fissures running through every moment, every corner of that beautiful empty house. I wasn't living with them, but every visit felt like stepping into a storm no one admitted was happening. The first major conflict began on a hot July afternoon, the kind where the sun presses against your skin like a warning. I'd come over to babysit because Jane had a brand meeting and Joshua had networking drinks. The kitchen smelled like old pizza boxes and spilled wine, and a thin layer of dust coated the marble counters. Hannah toddled toward me with a diaper so full it sagged almost to her knees. Dean trailed behind her carrying a trash bag almost as big as he was. "Why are you carrying that?" I asked. "Mom said to clean up the bottles," he said, voice small. I looked into the bag. Dozens of empty hard seltzers clinked inside. Some still had lipstick smears on the rims. "Where are your parents?" I whispered. Dean shrugged. "They said they'd be back before bedtime. It was already past 8. I felt the anger rise slow, steady, familiar, but I pushed it down. That night, after baths and bedtime stories, I stayed until they fell asleep. When Joshua and Jane stumbled in near midnight, laughing too loud, reeking of gin and perfume, Joshua waved a dismissive hand. "They're alive, right, Chill Willow?" His voice was sharp enough to slice. I said nothing, but that night, as I drove home with the windows down to keep myself awake, I thought, this isn't normal. This isn't safe. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning of the unraveling. The next incident happened 3 months later. It was early fall, leaves crunching under my shoes as I walked up their long driveway. The porch smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of burned-out candles. I'd come to drop off a set of winter clothes for the kids, something I'd bought with my own paycheck because I knew Joshua and Jane wouldn't. When I knocked, no one answered. I waited, knocked again, listened. Silence. I finally pulled out the spare key Joshua had given me in case of emergencies, though he insisted there would never be any. The moment I stepped inside, a cold heaviness settled in my chest. The living room was a disaster, dirty cups, makeup wipes, clothes thrown everywhere. The TV flickered on mute, some influencer live stream replay looping. My eyes swept the room, searching. Dean was curled on the couch, a blanket pulled to his chin. Hannah sat on the floor wearing only a thin shirt, clutching a stuffed rabbit, missing one eye. The air smelled like stale alcohol and something spoiled. "Honey, where are your parents?" I asked. Dean looked at me with an expression I'd later come to recognize as resignation. "They went to Chicago for the weekend," he said. "They left this morning. And they left you here alone." He hesitated. "They said they'd be back before dinner. What time did they leave before breakfast?" I checked the clock. It was 2 p.m. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to call every authority on earth to break something, just to release the pressure building in my chest, but I didn't. I fed them, cleaned them, picked up as much chaos as I could. Then I sat with them until bedtime. When Joshua came home the next day, he brushed me off again. "You're dramatic," he said. "They were fine. Kids are resilient." "Neglect isn't resilience," I said quietly. He rolled his eyes. "God, you're starting to sound like Mom. No wonder you're single." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. Not because I cared what he thought, but because I realized he intended to wound. I didn't know it then, but that cruelty was becoming his default setting. The third conflict came during Christmas season. I'd been working double shifts at the hospital, so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. Snow fell in thick flakes outside the window as I arrived for the family's annual holiday dinner. The house glowed with expensive decorations, gold ribbon glass ornaments, and a 12-foot tree. It looked picture-perfect, like the cover of a magazine. Then I saw the kids. Dean wore a sweater 3 sizes too small, the seams pulling across his shoulders. Hannah had shoes so tight she walked with a limp. Jane floated around the room in a sequined dress, martini in hand. Joshua bragged to Dad about some stock investment. No one noticed the kids in the corner. I slipped away to the kitchen and pulled out the small gifts I'd brought: winter boots for Dean, new pajamas for Hannah. When they opened them, their faces lit up with genuine joy, the kind that punches you in the throat. But then Jane walked in. "What's this?" she said, voice dripping with sugar and venom. "Clothes they needed," she scoffed. They have clothes. They don't fit. Well, maybe if you didn't spoil them, they'd learn gratitude. Her sarcasm was a knife. Joshua added, yeah. Don't undermine us. Parenting is harder than you think. I stared at the half-finished drinks, the laptop on the counter open to online blackjack, and thought you're not parenting at all. But I swallowed the truth because I didn't want to ignite a war. I didn't know it then, but the war had already begun. I was just the only one pretending it hadn't. A few months later came the fourth conflict, the one that shifted something in me permanently. It was spring, the kind where the air smells like wet soil and new beginnings. I stopped by unexpectedly with some groceries. When I stepped into the house, the silence hit me first. Then I smelled it. Something burning. I ran to the kitchen. Smoke poured from the toaster. 2 waffles were charred, blackened. Hannah was standing on a chair poking the toaster with a plastic fork. Dean stood nearby, eyes wide, holding a fire extinguisher he clearly didn't know how to use. Stop, I yelled, rushing forward. Hannah flinched, dropping the fork. It clattered to the floor. Dean stepped between us. She was hungry, he said. We didn't want to bother Mom and Dad. They were sleeping. I looked down the hallway. The master bedroom door was shut. Too quiet. How long have you been alone? Dean looked at the floor. Since last night. And they haven't gotten up, no. The anger that hit me then wasn't hot. It was icy cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. I marched to the bedroom door and knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I opened it. Joshua and Jane were sprawled across the bed, empty bottles on the nightstand, blackout curtains drawn. The room smelled like vodka, stale perfume, and carelessness. Wake up, I said. Joshua groaned. What do you want? Your children nearly set the kitchen on fire because no one fed them. He rolled over, waving a lazy hand. They're fine. No, I said, voice shaking. They're not. He sat up, eyes bloodshot. You don't get to judge me. You don't have kids. That's because I know what it takes to care for them. The words fell out before I could stop them. His face twisted. Get out, he said, and don't come back unless invited. I left the room, but that moment settled in me like a stone. Something inside me whispered, this isn't just neglect. It's danger. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment I began quietly preparing myself for the possibility that one day I might have to step in completely. The 5th conflict came almost 6 months before the freezing night. It was a Saturday morning, early fall again. The air was crisp, leaves just turning. Dean called me from an unknown number. Aunt Willow, he whispered. Can you come? My stomach clenched. Where are your parents? His voice shook. Mom said she had a headache. Dad said he was tired. They've been fighting all morning. I didn't even grab a jacket. I drove fast, the kind of fast that makes your heart sit in your throat. When I got there, the sound hit me before I even touched the door. A fight, loud, vicious. Something crashed. Jane screamed. Joshua cursed. The kids sat huddled behind the kitchen island, arms around each other. Hannah was crying silently, face blotchy. Dean looked at me with a hollow kind of calm. They do this a lot now, he whispered. I pulled them to their feet, grabbed their shoes, and walked them out the back door, down the yard, through the gate. Once we were in my car, I locked the doors, hands shaking. Are they hurting you? I asked. No, Dean said. Then he hesitated. Not yet. It was the yet that broke me. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment the kids began to see me, not as the aunt who visited, but as the adult who showed up. It was also the moment their parents began to see me as a threat, a problem, an obstacle. And obstacles in their world were things to destroy. I didn't know it then, but the next escalation would be the one that changed everything forever. The 6th conflict came not long after that Saturday blow-up, and it was the moment I realized Joshua and Jane had stopped caring about hiding anything. It was late October, the air cold enough that every breath felt brittle. I had just finished a 12-hour shift when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Can you take the kids tonight? We have a charity gala. I didn't even bother responding. I drove straight to their house, exhausted, smelling like hospital sanitizer and burnt coffee. When I walked inside, the cold hit me first, not the fall cold from outside. This was indoor cold, the kind that meant the HVAC had been turned off to save money. The living room was dim except for the blue glow of the TV. Dean sat on the rug with a bowl of cereal at 8 at night. Hannah was asleep on the couch, using a thin throw blanket that barely covered her feet. Where are your parents? I asked. Upstairs, getting ready. I went up the stairs 2 at a time, the ache in my legs buzzing like static. Joshua stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, the fabric shimmering under the vanity lights. Jane sat at her makeup table, her sequined dress hugging her body like a second skin. Turn the heat on, I said without preamble. Jane's eyes met mine in the mirror. It's not even freezing. It's 42 degrees outside, I shot back. The kids are cold. Joshua shrugged. Blankets exist. I felt my nails dig into my palms. Feed them something real before you leave. We're running late, Jane said, flipping her hair. There's peanut butter downstairs. You have money for gala tickets and champagne, I said quietly, but not dinner. That's when Joshua turned. His expression hardened into something strangely triumphant, like he'd been waiting for me to cross a line only he could see. Here's a thought, he said. If you hate the way we parents stop showing up, the only reason you want me gone is because you know you're screwing up. Jane let out a sharp laugh. Oh, please, you're obsessed with our family. It's weird. A chill crawled up my spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that this wasn't incompetence anymore. This was hostility. We don't need your help, Joshua said. In fact, maybe you should take a break from seeing the kids. Dean's cereal bowl clattered downstairs. Hannah stirred. My voice dropped. Say that again, Joshua smirked. You heard me. I walked out before I said something that would ignite a war I wasn't ready to fight. But that night driving home, I felt something crack a clean, sharp break. I didn't know it then, but that fracture was setting the stage for everything that followed. The seventh conflict, the one that should have been the turning point but wasn't, happened during a grocery store run. It was early winter. The aisles smelled like cinnamon candles and cheap pine wreaths. I had stopped in to grab soup after a long shift. That's when I heard a familiar small voice. Aunt Willow. I turned to see Dean standing alone near the self-checkout lane, dragging 2 overstuffed garbage bags behind him. His cheeks were red from the cold, his breath fogging in front of him. The bags were so heavy the plastic was digging into his wrists. What are you doing here? I asked. He swallowed hard, returning bottles. It felt like someone reached into my chest and squeezed. Where's your mom? Where's your dad? They're home, he said quietly. They said they were tired. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. People walked past us chatting about Christmas sales, oblivious to the fact that a child was hauling his parents' empties to feed himself. And his sister. How long have you been doing this? I asked. A while. Why, so Hannah can get Lunchables? That answer hit me harder than any insult Joshua had ever thrown at me. Show me your hands, I said. He held them out. The skin was raw, chafed little cuts across his fingers. You shouldn't be doing this alone. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Who else is going to? My throat closed. I wanted to scoop him up and run. Instead, I helped him feed every bottle into the machine. Each clank echoing like a small betrayal. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as an aunt and started thinking like a guardian. The 8th conflict came in the form of a phone call. It was January, the kind of winter where the cold sinks into your bones and makes everything feel sharp. The hospital was packed with flu cases. I was running on adrenaline and stale break room coffee when my cell buzzed. Joshua. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me I should. His voice was slurred. We need you to take the kids tonight. I'm on shift. So you're a nurse. Can't you leave early, Joshua? That's not how jobs work. He groaned. Fine, they'll be fine. The click of him hanging up echoed in my ear like a threat. My stomach twisted. I tried calling back. No answer. I texted Jane. No response. I even tried the house line. Nothing. I spent the entire shift half panicking, half furious. Later that night, I drove by their house on my way home. Lights off, driveway empty, snow starting to fall. I knocked. No answer. I almost broke the door down, but I told myself hoped they were just sleeping. That the kids were tucked in. That everything was okay. I didn't know it then, but that night was the quiet before the storm, the calm breath before a scream. The 9th conflict came just 2 weeks before the freezing night, and it was the one that showed me exactly how little Joshua valued the lives in his care. I had shown up unannounced again because by then unannounced was safer than planned. Joshua was in the backyard smoking a cigar, the smell of it mixing with the metallic cold in the air. Hannah was on the patio, in a thin shirt and no shoes, hopping from foot to stay warm. Dean was sweeping leaves with a broom twice his height. What is going on? I demanded. Joshua blew smoke in the opposite direction, not even looking at me. Teaching them responsibility. It's 32 degrees. They'll survive. This is neglect, I said. He finally faced me. You want to know the real problem, Willow? You undermine us. You act like we're failures. You make us look bad. You're doing that yourself. He stepped closer, the cigar glowing at the tip. Stay out of our business. No. The word surprised him. Surprised me too. His eyes narrowed, calculating. You better watch yourself. You think you're better than us because you play nurse, because you live alone with your stupid little job and your stupid little apartment. My jaw clenched. I protect your children because you don't. He flicked ash onto the ground. One day, Willow, you're going to push too far. I didn't respond. But inside, I felt the shift, the cold, steady resolve settling in like frost. I didn't know it then, but that line he drew was one I'd soon obliterate. The 10th conflict, the final escalation before everything snapped, came the night before the freezing storm. It was small, insignificant, but it was also the last warning I ignored. I stopped by with a bag of groceries, eggs, bread, apples, chicken, essentials. When I opened the fridge, I froze. Wine, energy drinks, takeout containers rotting at the edges. No real food. Dean hovered near the kitchen island, eyes darting between me and the stairs. Did you eat today? I asked. He hesitated. That was answer enough. I cooked them dinner, simple pasta with butter, peas, and parmesan. Nothing fancy, but the way they inhaled it made my stomach knot. Halfway through, Joshua and Jane came downstairs dressed for yet another night out. Joshua smirked when he saw me. Look who can't mind her own business. Jane's perfume hit me like a chemical cloud. Oh, relax. They're fed. They're hungry, I said. They're kids, Joshua retorted. Kids exaggerate. Children don't exaggerate hunger. Jane rolled her eyes. Here we go. Nurse Willow to the rescue. They laughed. At me, in front of the children. And maybe that should have been the moment I called CPS. Maybe that should have been the moment I drew the line. But I didn't. I washed the dishes. I kissed the kids goodnight. I left quietly. I didn't know it then, but this was the last peaceful moment before everything shattered. And then came the night of the storm. The night that turned every suspicion into truth, every fear into evidence, every quiet wound into a weapon. The night they sent their children into the cold in pajamas. The night Dean walked a mile through frozen darkness carrying his sister on his back. The night my door became their last chance. I didn't know it then, but every conflict, every warning, every quiet escalation had been leading us here. To the moment everything would finally break. To the moment nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the ambulance doors slammed shut behind us, the sound echoed through my ribs like the crack of a gunshot. It was the kind of sound you don't forget, the kind that tells you the world you knew 10 minutes ago is gone. Hannah lay strapped to the gurney oxygen mask, fogging with every shallow breath. Dean sat next to me, wrapped in thermal blankets, shaking so hard the metal bench rattled beneath him. But the climax didn't start in that ambulance. It started the moment the hospital doors slid open and swallowed us whole. Mercy General at dawn looked like a battlefield, fluorescent lights, humming with unnatural brightness, nurses rushing past with clipboards, monitors beeping in restless rhythm. The air smelled like antiseptic, burnt coffee, and urgency. I'd worked 1,000 shifts here, but never as a patient's family. Never with my heart lodged in my throat. Within minutes, Hannah was rushed to the pediatric ICU, a swarm of nurses surrounding her tiny, freezing body. Dean was wheeled off to a treatment room, his feet too damaged to bear weight. I stayed between them like a ghost, moving from one hallway to another, scrubs clinging to my skin, adrenaline crashing through me. Then the automatic doors opened at 9 a.m., and everything detonated. Joshua came in first, stumbling in a wrinkled suit, hair sticking up like he'd slept in it. Jane followed, still in last night's gown mascara, smudged perfume mixing with the stale scent of casino smoke. She was crying, the performative kind, loud and messy. But the moment Joshua's eyes landed on me, the performance ended. He walked toward me with a practiced look of concern, the same look he used whenever he needed to manipulate someone. Thank God you were there, Willow, he said, voice gentle. This is just a misunderstanding. I'm sure the kids are exaggerating. Exaggerating? My voice cracked into something raw. They were hypothermic. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Let's be rational, okay? No need to involve CPS or the police. I know how hard your loans are. I froze. What? He smiled like a shark. Come on, Willow, I pay them off. And you tell the authorities it was a mistake. Doors get stuck. Kids wander. You know how it is. He had the audacity to treat this like a bargain. You locked your children outside in 23-degree weather, I whispered. It was the lock, he snapped. Technology messes up. You know that. No, I said. You messed up. His smile vanished. The mask slipped. You're making a big mistake, he said, voice lowering to a dangerous calm. You're putting your entire career at risk. If you think I won't drag you down with me, before he could finish, he grabbed my arm, hard. Pain shot up to my shoulder. I yanked back, but his fingers dug in. Let go, I hissed. But Joshua didn't let go. He shoved me, harder than he meant to. My hip hit a metal cart and instruments clattered across the linoleum. Pain exploded through my arm as it scraped against the wall. What is wrong with you? I gasped. Before he could answer, a small voice cut through the chaos. Don't touch her. We turned. Dean stood barefoot in his wheelchair, gripping the armrests with white-knuckled hands. His bandaged feet hung off the footrests. His face was drained of color, but his eyes burned with something old and fierce. "Don't you ever touch her," he screamed. "You left us." Time froze. Hannah was fighting for her life 3 floors up. Dean, this child who had carried his sister through a freezing forest, was screaming in public for the first time in his life. And Joshua. He stepped back like the words had physically struck him. "Son," he started, but Dean's voice cracked into a sob. "You left us to die." The waiting room fell silent. Nurses stopped moving. Even the beeping monitors seemed to hush. Then the tension snapped. Security rushed in. A nurse yelled for backup. I stumbled toward Dean, pulling him into my arms, feeling his little body tremble against mine. Officer Jasper arrived seconds later. "What's going on here?" he asked. Joshua immediately shifted into his reasonable man act. "This is a family misunderstanding. My sister is overreacting." "I barely touched her." Jasper looked at my scraped elbow, the swelling already forming. Then he looked at Dean, the frostbite dressings, the purple lips, the trembling. "Turn around," Jasper said. "For what?" Joshua scoffed. "Hands behind your back. You can't be serious." Jasper pulled out his handcuffs. "You are under arrest for assault and child endangerment." The metal clicked around Joshua's wrists with a finality that made the entire lobby go silent. Jane lunged forward, shrieking, "This is insane. We came to check on our kids. And she's framing us." Jasper didn't even look at her. "Jane Hart, you're under arrest as well." She backed up. No, you can't. I'm their mother." When she tried to pull away, another officer grabbed her arms. Jane screamed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You'll regret this, Willow," she shrieked. "You'll regret everything." They dragged her out, both of them screaming, Joshua cursing Jane, begging. The lobby doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. And for the first time in 2 years, the hospital felt quiet. I sank to the floor beside Dean's wheelchair. My scraped palm stung. My elbow throbbed. But none of it mattered. Dean looked at me with eyes full of fear and guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You have nothing," I said, taking his hand to be sorry for. The climax wasn't over. Not yet. 2 hours later, Carla Evans from CPS arrived. Her heels clicked down the hallway like a judge's gavel. She scanned the environment, her expression unreadable. "Miss Hart," she said crisply, "we need a full statement. And you should prepare yourself. The children will remain in protective custody until a home study can be completed." When I asked, "Tomorrow morning?" My stomach dropped. "Tomorrow," she nodded. "We don't have another investigator available sooner." My apartment flashed through my mind, small, cluttered, unprepared. I had no bunk beds, no childproofing, no anything. "If your home does not meet standards," she continued, "the children will be placed in foster care." I felt the ground tilt. "No," I whispered. "No, they have me." Carla's eyes hardened. "Then prove it." She left. The sound of her heels fading down the hallway felt like a countdown. 24 hours to become something I wasn't sure I could be. But there was no other choice. The climax sharpened again when Joshua and Jane were processed. Their mugshots hit the police database. Jasper came back to update me. He handed me a printed report showing the charges. "Willow," he said softly, "this is going to get uglier before it gets better." I nodded. "I'm ready." "You sure?" I looked at Dean, pale and exhausted. "I have to be." But even then, the climax wasn't done. At 3 p.m., as I sat at Dean's bedside, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number," I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A woman whispered, "You don't know me, but I was at the casino last night." I stiffened. She continued, voice trembling. "Joshua was showing off the new smart lock system. He changed the door code during the party. He bragged about it. He never sent the new code to his son." My entire body went still. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "It wasn't a malfunction. He locked them out. Evidence, real solid evidence. Proof that everything Dean had suffered wasn't a mistake. It was negligence born from arrogance." "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because your niece almost died," she said. "And I have kids too." She hung up. I stared at the phone, pulse pounding in my ears. The climax had ripped the truth open. But it wasn't finished. At 4 p.m., the hospital's legal team called me into HR. I walked into the room expecting the worst termination, suspension, disciplinary action triggered by Jane's online attacks. Instead, the HR director closed the door gently. "We've reviewed everything," she said. "The footage, the injuries, the live stream Jane posted accusing you." My heartbeat thudded. "We're filing a countersuit for defamation," she continued. "And we're supporting you fully." I blinked, stunned. "You're not alone, Willow," Dr. Grayson added. "We're standing with you." Something in my chest cracked relief, disbelief, gratitude. I felt myself break and rebuild in a single breath. But there was one more moment. The final spike. The last strike of the climax came that night when Dean fell asleep, holding my hand, his breathing soft and even. I stepped into the hallway and felt the world shift. The fluorescent lights, the hum of the vents, the cold tile beneath my shoes, all of it stilled around me. For years, I'd watched this family destroy itself from the inside. For years, I'd swallowed my voice because speaking up felt pointless. For years, I'd been invisible, but not anymore. Not after what I'd seen, not after what they'd done. Standing in that hallway with the weight of every conflict behind me and the lives of 2 children ahead of me, something changed. My breath steadied, my spine straightened. A cold, steady resolve settled into my bones. This wasn't just a crisis. It was a turning point, a line, a beginning, because now I had evidence, I had witnesses, I had legal support, I had CPS on my side. And above all, I had a fire inside me that had been waiting years to ignite. What Joshua and Jane didn't know not yet was that this wasn't the end. It was the start of something far bigger. And I was no longer the quiet one, no longer the afterthought, no longer the spare piece. That cold smile, the kind you feel before you see, found its way to my lips as I looked back at the ICU doors. They thought they had broken me, I whispered. But all they did was give me everything I needed to take them down. The storm outside finally broke the next afternoon, but the weather that mattered was inside me. Something had settled there, not like dust, but like wet concrete hardening into a shape I hadn't chosen and couldn't undo. For the first time, my family wasn't just hurting me in the shadows. They'd done it in public on camera, in front of cops and nurses. There were records now, evidence. I walked back into Dean's room and watched his chest rise and fall. His bandaged feet were propped on pillows, skin around them swollen and angry. Hannah slept 2 floors up, her breathing finally steady. On the bedside tray sat a styrofoam cup of coffee, going cold, a plastic bag with his ruined sneakers, and my phone. On that phone were pictures of frostbitten toes, vitals, timestamps, the police report, and a missed call from the woman who'd told me about the smart lock. I picked it up and scrolled. Emails from the hospital's legal team. A text from Carla confirming the emergency custody order. And at the bottom, a notification, Smart Lock Systems, your subpoena request has been received. That was the moment it clicked. Joshua wanted to twist this into a misunderstanding and accident that made him look careless, not cruel. But there was nothing accidental about changing a door code and never telling your son. Nothing accidental about leaving kids in a house with no food and a garage with no heat. This wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern. Patterns could be proved. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't scream. Instead, something colder slid into place. I wasn't just going to protect Dean and Hannah. I was going to make sure their parents never got close enough to hurt them again. The first step wasn't dramatic. It was math. I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers. Savings, a tiny emergency fund. Then I thought about my grandmother's necklace in my dresser, the laptop I loved, the espresso machine that made 5 a.m. survivable. They'd always called me the sensible one, the one who didn't take risks, who stayed small and safe. But once you've survived being invisible long enough, you stop being afraid of losing things. My revenge wasn't going to be screaming matches and shattered glasses. It wasn't going to look like Jane's stories, all drama and no substance. Mine would be quieter, built out of paperwork and case files and sworn statements. Bloody knuckles leave bruises. Paper cuts change lives. I sat down, opened a new note, and started listing everything I had. Hospital footage of Joshua shoving me. Nurse witnesses who heard him threaten my license. The ER incident report. CPS notes about the house. Mr. Clint next door who'd watched Dean drag bags of bottles to the wagon. The casino witness. The smart lock data. Medical records. Photos of Dean's feet, of Hannah's lips, of my bruised arm. Every line I typed felt less like a list and more like ammo. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet, but I knew who would. In the back of my mind, a name surfaced: Attorney Vance. I'd heard it in a break room once. If you ever need someone to bury a neglectful parent in court, a social worker had said you call Vance. He doesn't lose. Now it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like a plan. I looked at Dean again. He was half asleep, fingers curled around the blanket. There was a crease between his brows he shouldn't have had at 11. They're going to try to come back for you, I murmured. They're going to cry and lie and twist everything. That's who they are. His eyes opened a sliver. Do you think they'll win? I thought of Joshua's threats, Jane's live stream lies, her followers filling my inbox with hate. I thought of CPS hearings, legal fees, and how often the system bent toward whoever shouted loudest. Then I thought of something else, the way the security footage framed Joshua's hand on my arm, the way the nurse immediately called security, the way Officer Jasper's jaw tightened when he saw Dean's feet, Carla's pen scratching emergency custody across a form. I let out a slow breath. Not this time, I said. They don't know it yet, but they handed me everything I need. He watched me for another beat, then nodded. His eyes drifted shut again. Outside the window, the sky had turned the dull gray of late afternoon. Underneath that quiet, I could already hear a different kind of noise in my head. The low rumble of hearings and testimony, the grind of a machine I was finally willing to step into. They thought the storm was that night in the snow. They were wrong. That was just the wind-up. The real storm was coming. And this time, I wasn't the forgotten girl at the dinner table waiting for someone to notice I existed. I was the one with the file, the witnesses, the bruises, the truth. I don't start fights, but I finish them. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because stories like this don't end when the police lights fade or when the paperwork gets stamped. They end when the people who were never supposed to have power finally take it back. And trust me, this fight isn't finished. What happened that night was only the beginning, and the truth has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. So keep watching, keep listening, and don't go anywhere. This story isn't over.